Hello students, today we will see behavioral technology, cognitive behavioral approaches and specific techniques. In this chapter, we will address some important questions related to health and health behaviors, such as how do we influence people to make healthy behavior choices? When are health promoting behaviors learned and internalized as lifelong health practices? What are the most effective age appropriate mechanisms for developing sustainable health behavior throughout the lifespan? What are the optimal developmental periods for developing sustainable health behaviors? How do people learn to make age appropriate decisions about health behaviors? What behavioral factors influence people to seize healthy behaviors like physical activity and initiate less healthy behaviors like decreased physical activity, substance use, etc.? Are there common core mechanisms that underlie the development of multiple health behaviors? Now we shall try to answer at least few of them. Human behavior plays a central role in the maintenance of health and the prevention of disease. Growing evidence suggests that effective programs to change individual health behavior require a multifaceted approach to helping people adapt, change and maintain behavior. For example, Jeffrey et al. In 2000 have found that strategies for establishing healthy eating habits in children and adolescents might be quite ineffective for changing maladaptive eating behavior, that is, when they are used to substitute one pattern for another in the same population. And similarly, in the same year, Oken et al. Have found that maintaining a particular behavior over time might require different strategies than will establishing that behavior in the first place. Therefore, models of behavior change have been developed to guide strategies to promote healthy behaviors, reduce behaviors that increase health risk, and facilitate effective adaptation to and coping with illness. Considerable data support the notion that lifestyle changes can have a tremendous impact on the prevalence of many diseases, including but not limited to cardiovascular disease, diabetes, cancer, substance abuse, and sexually transmitted diseases. Several institutes and centers of the NIH have invested in research to promote and sustain healthy behaviors. Researchers have found that behaviors and decision-making processes learned and habituated at a young age are likely to be more sustainable over time and thus may have greater impact than attempting to change the behavior of adults. Therefore, in this scenario, we need to have an approach that could be applied more effectively with adults, and the behavioral approach has been found to be an effective one in this domain. The behavioral approach to health holds that with appropriate learning, a person can change his or her destructive behaviors and take action towards the achievement of health. Once a person has made a commitment to the behavior change, success can be a matter of finding the right behavioral program to meet his or her needs. Therefore, using a behavioral approach, problems are defined in terms of specific behaviors and involve exactly what the person does, where he or she does it, when and with whom, and explanations that focus on an individual's personal characteristics are avoided. Therefore, their behaviors are assessed objectively. If we consider Carolyn, who has a problem with binge eating, she comes home from work and heads straight for the refrigerator. She has developed a habit of eating large quantities of processed high-fat, high-calorie foods. They include ice cream, cookies, potato chips and fizzy drinks, which are clearly not nutritious for an active young woman in her 20s. Carolyn's problem in behavior terms is not that she is uncontrolled or a binge eater. Such labels are derogatory and unproductive. Rather, her problem behavior is that she allows herself to become exceedingly hungry by skipping lunch and drinks coffee all afternoon, a habit that makes her anxious and causes her blood sugar level to fall quite low at the end of the afternoon. In addition, she has also developed a habit of eating immediately after arriving home. Therefore, she uses food to reduce the tension she experiences from her work. One solution to Carolyn's binge eating problem would be to develop different habits. For example, she could eat balanced meals throughout the day, and after work, she could take a warm bath to relax. She might also practice yoga and take an exercise class. She could then prepare a nutritious dinner for herself. She might be careful to keep only nutritious food in the house and avoid stocking up on dessert items when she shops. By focusing on specific behaviors like this, Carolyn could lose weight and be healthier, as well as find more effective ways to deal with her work stresses. By doing so, she would avoid self-depreciating labels that might be damaging her self-concept. And the ultimate goal of any behavioral approach is for an individual to translate his or her intentions into behaviors and to maintain those behaviors. Hence, the individual needs to show self-control. Although other people such as health professionals or family members can certainly assist an individual in carrying out health behaviors, no one else can consistently monitor an individual's behavior and dispense rewards or punishments accordingly. Rather, the patient's own behavioral regimen must be based upon self-control and self-management. The capacity for self-control involves not something that one is, but rather something that one does. So, a basic principle of this approach is that reinforcement of a particular behavior will increase the frequency of that behavior. As we all know, reinforcement is anything that increases the probability of the occurrence of a particular behavior. Rewards of various sorts, for example, can serve as reinforcements. And any behavior can be removed from the control of environmental reinforcements and brought under control of self-imposed reinforcements. In this behavioral approach to health and health behaviors, we have seen that with appropriate learning, a person can change his or her destructive behaviors and learn healthy behaviors, and they could do this with their own self-control and self-management as well as with appropriate reinforcements. In this module, we will see how classical and operant conditioning could be used to adapt, change and maintain healthy behaviors. Classical or respondent conditioning is a process by which a behavior comes to be evoked by a once neutral stimulus because that stimulus was paired with one that automatically evoked the behavior. As an example, imagine that you munch popcorn, peanuts and other delicious enticing food nearly every time you study. Pretty soon, the stimulus of opening your book will evoke your desire to munch. Some smokers report that smoking is sometimes so automatically triggered by external stimuli such as a cup of coffee or the sight of their desk at home that they find themselves halfway through a cigarette with no recollection of having lit up. Classical conditioning of unhealthy behaviors can occur readily and inadvertently, and an individual who wishes to be in control of his or her behavior must be constantly aware of stimuli in the environment and his or her responses to them. If we take the example of Brent, who wants to control the stimuli in his house that cue him to snack when he is bored. In order to do so, he must limit his eating to one and only one place in the house, for example, the kitchen table. He must allow himself to eat only when sitting down with a place setting and with a limited portion of food. These restrictions would prevent him from eating when he is not hungry, just because eating may feel like a fairly pleasurable way to keep busy. By making eating a less convenient activity, Brent will be able to limit the amount of time he spends eating, and perhaps he'll find diversions for himself. In the same manner, a student can limit snacking to study break time and have something healthy to eat far away from the books. This will limit the cues that trigger the desire to eat junk food unintentionally. Of course, classical conditioning principles can be used not only to eliminate unhealthy behaviors, but to enhance healthy behaviors as well. For example, by taking vitamins with every breakfast, John can increase the likelihood that breakfast will serve as a cue or reminder for him to take his vitamins. Classical conditioning introduces concepts that have been particularly important in the design of health-related interventions, such as reinforcement, stimulus-response relationships, modeling, cues to action, and expectancies. And this explains that being mindful of our environment and of our own behavior triggers, we could unlearn harmful behaviors and relearn useful ones. Let us now move on to operant conditioning. Operant conditioning is based on the principle that behavior is shaped by the consequences that follow it. Psychologist B.F. Skinner in 1938 persuasively demonstrated the powerful force of operant conditioning, and considerable research has been done since then by Bandura in 1969 and Carolyn in 1980. Operant behavior that is rewarded or reinforced by the individual or by the environment is more likely to be reported. Reinforcement, of course, can be positive or negative. Positive reinforcement increases the probability that a behavior will be enacted by providing the individual with something that he or she values after enacting the target behavior. Negative reinforcement, as we know, occurs when an individual is removed from a negatively valued state, for example, one that is uncomfortable, as a result of enacting the behavior. Thus, alcohol abuse may be negatively reinforced and thus increase the probability of occurrence if the result is a reduction in anxiety or physical discomfort. And of course, operant behavior that is punished will diminish in frequency of occurrence. Shaping or graduated treatment implementation involves the application of reinforcement for successive approximations of the desired behavior. Shaping involves initially rewarding anything that vaguely resembles the target action, such as putting on the running shoes and lazily walking around. Over time, only progressively closer approximations to the desired behavior will be reinforced. Therefore, the individual must walk briskly or run the entire target distance in order to receive reinforcement. Thus, the individual moves in a stepwise fashion to build a behavioral repertoire. Sometimes what happens is people fail to translate their intentions into health behaviors because they lack awareness of their own current behavior and ways to modify it. Their performance criteria might be vague. Example, they might want to get in shape but really don't know how to exercise with maximum effectiveness. People may even have incorrect notions about the timing of rewards. Some may think it's fine to take the reward before performing the target behavior. This approach is likely to fail. Thus, patient education can contribute a great deal by assisting a person in self-regulation towards the goal of developing healthier habits. Self-imposed operant conditioning occurs through the process of self-regulation, and self-regulation has three stages. The first is self-monitoring or self-observation, which involves deliberately and carefully attending to the precise details of one's own behavior. For example, it may include keeping records of exactly what one eats. Complete details of behavior might be recorded in a diary, such as the exact foods eaten and their quantities, as well as the location, time, antecedent and consequent events and feelings. The individual can then analyze his or her own behavioral patterns to find out what moods trigger overeating. A great deal can be revealed that will help in behavior change. The second stage in self-regulation is self-evaluation. The behaviors assessed through self-monitoring could be compared against a specific criterion or ideal. For example, a person might compare the percentage of his or her daily calorie obtained from saturated fat with the ideal, which experts believe should be kept below 10%. Sometimes so much is revealed to a person by self-monitoring and self-evaluation that behavior is modified without further intervention. More often, behavior must be changed with some form of intervention. Therefore, the third stage of self-regulation involves self-reinforcement. The individual rewards or reinforces him or herself for behavior that matches or approximates the behavioral goal. For example, an hour of exercise might be regularly rewarded with 10 minutes in the health club steam room. Poor choices for reward, of course, are those that actually sabotage the goal, such as having several hot fudge sundaes after a week of successfully cutting out desserts. In operant conditioning, we see how reinforcement could be used to shape our own or others' behavior. It also states how self-imposed operant conditioning could be practiced through self-regulation, self-evaluation and self-reinforcement. For behavioral approaches to be effective, they need to be combined with cognitive strategies. Therefore, we will now see what and how cognitive modifications could be used to carry out healthy behaviors. A behavioral strategy for change can be enhanced with cognitive modification. Even after a person has established a strong behavioral intention to act, cognitive factors might continue to affect change. Thoughts play an important role in behavioral control. Assessment and expectation for their own abilities can decisively affect people's maintenance of behavior change. A best behavioral regimen can be ruined by a person's negative self-statements. Suppose that one evening you give in to your overwhelming craving for a double hot fudge sundae with French vanilla and double chocolate fudge ice cream. You have broken your diet and filed out your behavioral regimen. You might then torture yourself with such thoughts as, see, I really have no control, I am doomed, I may as well forget the idea of ever getting into shape. Such negative self-talk can lead people to abandon their behavioral regimen altogether and give up their goals. This is often the outcome of one lapse by a dieter, or a person who has quit smoking, or an ex-drinker who takes a drink. One mistake can begin a round of self-deprecation that ends in feeling of hopelessness and in disaster for the good intentions. Therefore, a better approach for the relapsing would be to focus on thoughts of the intended behavior while saying encouraging rather than discouraging self-statements. In order to really succeed at long-term maintenance and control, an individual must become aware of his or her own potentially damaging negative self-statements and learn to use self-instructions that are compatible with success. Behavioral approaches work well when internal dialogues support rather than interfere with the process of behavioral self-control. And when internal dialogues are negative, there is significant risk that self-regulation will be undermined. An individual can, however, learn to replace negative self-deprecating thoughts with positive encouragements by applying 3 self-regulation principles that we have seen to thoughts. Those are self-monitoring, self-evaluation and self-reinforcement. The individual must first become aware of the damaging self-statements by making them conscious and analyzing them. This might be accomplished by saying all thoughts about oneself as they occur out loud into a tape recorder, or by writing them down in a journal at regular intervals during the day. Then the individual needs to evaluate these statements and determine the extent to which they are encouraging or not. The discouraging negative self-statements need to be replaced with positive ones. Finally, the person must then practice the positive statements and reinforce them. Hence, we can see that as research by Brownell and Cohen conducted in 1995 suggests, the most effective methods for modifying health behaviors involve a combination of cognitive and behavioral modification techniques. There are various other behavioral strategies that could be used for successful behavior change. A kind of prompt or reminder could be used to reinforce health behavior triggers. A person might have a note on the refrigerator door to remember to choose fruit for a snack. Another person might place a pill bottle next to the toothbrush to remember to take medication in the morning and at night. Toothbrushing before bed and after breakfast then serves as a stimulus or reminder for taking the medication. These can help an individual to keep track of daily pill intake. And other behavioral prompts might include setting a wristwatch alarm for the time of each pill dosage or arrange to be paged at pill time. Reminders from family members can be extremely helpful, as can reminder postcards and calls from health professionals to prompt behaviors ranging from pill taking to follow-up medical and dental visits. Fortunately, the longer the person has engaged successfully in a behavior, the more environmental stimuli there are to serve as prompts and reminders to carry out the behavior. For example, after one has acquired the habit of exercising regularly, many things in the environment serves as prompts to exercise, such as the shoes one uses for running or the hand weights one uses for muscle conditioning. Prompts and reminders can be used for one's advantage. Purposely keeping exercise gear in the car, for example, or interacting with people who exercise regularly can provide the necessary prompts to maintain the desired behavior. And a number of other mental control strategies could also be coupled with more overt behavioral control strategies, in order to maximize behavior change. A number of mental control strategies could also be used that might be coupled with more overt behavioral control strategies in order to maximize behavior change. And anything that serves to keep one focused and motivated towards behavior change can be considered mental control strategy, including goal setting, relaxation and stress management, self-monitoring, cognitive restructuring, imagery and mental rehearsal. These strategies as a group do aid behavior change. For example, a recent review of the literature has showed that when people are trying to increase their performance in a particular sport, setting goals, managing their levels of arousal and using cognitive regulation and imagery all lead to better performance. Some mental control strategies may not work, however. If you are often tempted to overeat, you might resolve to simply stop thinking about food. You might reason that if you don't think about it, you won't be tempted. This may be true, but it's very difficult, if not impossible, to simply stop thinking about something. In fact, you would probably know from experience that deciding not to think about something often moves the topic to the forefront of your mind and makes it more difficult to forget. The counterproductive effects of trying not to think about something are even more stronger when what one is trying to avoid is a real issue instead of something contrived. Clearly, when exercising mental control, it pays to know what works and what does not. For instance, it's not likely that just trying to stop thinking about all those delicious snacks will work, but distracting oneself with an interesting activity may enable one to forget about snacking for hours. Along with cognitive behavioral approaches and other techniques, one should seek social support as well, as family and friends play a crucial role in providing encouragement for achieving health goals, the all-important ingredient that is social support. Chaplin in 1979 has defined social support as any input that furthers the goal of the receiver, and there are two major kinds of social support: tangible support, which includes physical resources that benefit the individual in some way, and psychological support that provides the individual with help to develop affective or emotional states that engender well-being. Tangible social support helps the person out, whereas physical support helps him or her to feel better. And social support from family and friends can play an important role in assisting a person to translate intentions into health behaviors. Lack of social support, on the other hand, can be devastating to the health goal. If we take the example of smoking, one review has found that best predictors of relapse following cessation among adults are the smoking habits of friends and family. It's commonplace for relapsed smokers to report obtaining the cigarette with which they relapsed from a friend who may even have offered it. Therefore, those attempting to stay off cigarettes report high and troublesome levels of friend smoking in their presence. On the other hand, time spent with non-smokers as well as sustained participation in smoking cessation programs with others who have the same goal helps maintain quitting. In general, the positive presence of people who are either verbally encouraging or who themselves enact the target behavior can do much to facilitate the translation of intentions into behavior. Even the excellent approach that suits the individual and the appropriate social support would be of no use and would be a failure if measures to prevent relapses are not taken. Perhaps the biggest problem facing the individual who strives to adapt healthy practices and eliminate unhealthy ones is relapse. Relapse could be defined as the recurrence of symptoms or behaviors after a period of improvement. For example, the ex-smoker who has abstained from smoking begins to smoke regularly. The patient who has treated successfully for obesity begins to steadily gain weight. The diabetic whose blood sugar levels have remained steady loses dietary control and stops taking insulin regularly. But not all backsliding, that is returning previously to the past behavior, leads to relapse. Less serious lapse could be termed as a mistake or an error or a slip-up that involves a re-emergence of the past habit but may or may not lead to a relapse. Research has demonstrated that the attribution a person makes to his or her lapse may determine whether a relapse occurs. Those who relapsed were found to have more internal character-based explanations for the slip than did those who did not relapse. Those who relapsed tend to blame themselves and their own personal characteristics more than they did the setting, and the situation in which relapse occur vary from person to person, but usually it includes negative emotions such as anger, frustration, interpersonal conflicts such as argument with a spouse or disagreements with people at work, and social pressures such as temptations at gatherings in which other people are engaging in the behavior that the individual is trying to avoid. And when circumstances constitute a high risk situation, the chances of slip up in one's established health behaviors can easily occur. Therefore, avoidance of high risk situations would be a wise approach, provided doing so would not deprive the individual of experiencing other aspects of life that are highly valued. Brownell et al. In 1986 have found in a research that there are 3 stages in the prevention of relapse: enhancing one's motivation to continue the health behavior by providing oneself with regular awards or by focusing on the rewarding natural consequences of the behavior, and second would be acquiring and practicing skills to prevent and to deal with lapses, which probably will occur, and third would be to maintain the health behavior by continued careful monitoring, general lifestyle change, and seeking out social support. Even after taking all necessary steps or considering all the necessary steps, there could be some practical barriers that might be difficult to overcome. Certain practical aspects of people's life can either enhance their ability to carry out intended health actions or make these actions relatively impossible to accomplish. Obviously, an individual's access to health services of various types, for example, immunization, can affect whether he or she will actually use them. And not surprisingly, researchers have found that a complex treatment regimen is more difficult to follow than a simple one. For example, can be relatively easy, but the action of taking a pill should be impaired with a regularly occurring activity such as getting up in the morning, brushing one's teeth, or retiring to bed at night. In general, it's better for an individual to tackle one behavior at a time and then link the successful health behaviors together. Taking on too many health resolutions at one time or making more than one change daily lifestyle can be overwhelming and can make one so stressed that it's tempting to just forget about it. If we take the example of Iris, health psychologists could help in changing several of her behaviors. They can increase her chances of success by approaching her in sequence. They might first help her to develop a behavioral regimen of self-regulation for one of her health goals, say riding her stationary bicycle 4 times a week. Only after this regular exercise has become a habit, reinforced perhaps with a relaxing hot shower afterwards, would they advise her to begin to add on. The next step, for example, might be to improve her diet. Together, the health psychologist and Iris could develop a self-regulation regimen to reduce the fat content of her diet, first to 30% and then to 20%, and cut in half her intake of simple sugars. Her rewards could include purchasing some attractive, fashionable clothing and getting a massage once a month to reduce the tension that inspired that terrible diet. She might even make a point to pay for these clothes with money she has put aside every time she wanted to purchase a hot fudge sundae but resisted the urge. Now, the good feelings that accompany exercise, hot shower, and a massage, as well as the psychological boost that come from looking better and new clothes, can become the reinforcers for her new healthier diet. Similarly, a person could take the health approach and the technique that is tailored to suit their needs and their specific conditions. So, after studying the cognitive behavioral approaches and the various other techniques, we could now adequately answer few of the questions that we arised in the beginning of this chapter. That's all about this chapter. Thank you.